This episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show is brought to you by Mountain Glass Arts. For the month of February, Mountain Glass is offering shot, tube, and rod at 40% off. Just put in the code SHOT, that is SCHOTT at checkout. And for all you soft glass nerds, they are offering their COE 104 sale, Creation is Messy, 30% off. Just put in the code MESSY, that is MESSY at checkout. And for any other questions and all your glass needs, just go to mountainglass.com. That is mountainglass.com. This is the Wise Guy Radio Show, a podcast dedicated to educating and inspiring through conversations with today's top talents in the world of glass. We will be dissecting their journeys in hopes to deliver actionable content that you, the artist, can start implementing now, helping you grow not only as a creative spirit, but also a successful artistic entrepreneur. With a little organization, relationship building, and your artistic ability, you can obtain greatness. Climb aboard, whether an artist, retail owner, or enthusiast. We have a ton of fun in store for you. Welcome to the Wise Guy Radio Show.
You're listening to the Wise Guy Radio Show.
This is Jay Michael, your host. Thank you so much for tuning in today. With 17 years of experience behind the torch, I'm excited to bring you conversations with artists, sharing their stories in hopes to inspire and entertain while helping you grow your business. Today we are having a best of episode with Luke Zimmerman Esq. He was back on episode number 30 where we introduced him to you all and started to discuss the conversation of cannabis laws and changes as they happen state by state. Slowly but surely we will have federal, hopefully across the board, it's legal. But in the meantime, we get into topics of discussion that are very imperative for y'all to understand and take to heart, because we still have a fine line that we walk as we deal with being functional artists. For those of you out there that are not functional glass artists, that just do soft glass and beads and what have you, or furnace work, this show is probably still good for you to listen to, because we do get into other topics of conversation. We discuss a little bit of copywriting and trademark laws and what have you, some business stuff. He was in a recent episode where we did discuss more in depth in the trademark rules, and the next time he's coming on the show, we will be discussing copywriting. But I hope you guys do enjoy this. I noticed that there was a large influx of new listeners, so I wanted to make sure that those who are new to the show that haven't gone back all the way and listened to these past episodes that got this one now. And if you already have heard this episode, I recommend that you listen to it again, because these rules and things and conversations that him and I have are so important for y'all to understand and to really, again, take to heart. And as we go through and cover our asses, part of the conversation we get into is the idea of including a waiver in your packages. For those of you that are functional artists that ship pipes and stuff across states, we have a little waiver that I wrote up. And it's not any kind of legal advice, but it is just a simple release waiver, just saying and stating that what you are shipping is for legal intention, blah, blah, blah. There is a Dropbox folder that I have that I will have linked on the show notes, that you can just click on the link to this Dropbox folder, and then you can just download this little paper. I believe the paper, if I remember correctly, I have it so that there's 3 per on one sheet, so you can make yourself multiple copies, and then just cut them out and throw them in your orders. And it's not going to really keep you out of jail if your packages get confiscated by the post office and are considered to be illegal and paraphernalia. But what it will do is start the process of us all taking this industry seriously in terms of the laws and the way things are changing, because as we move forward with laws changing, not only do we need to take this seriously, our customers do as well, and also understand that the IRS and the government is beginning to take our industry seriously. Those of us that went through Operation Pipe Dreams and that have heard about it, that was a huge milestone, if you want to call it, roadblock in a sense too, that happened. And it was something we all learned from, and it honestly pushed a lot of us back underground with our artwork. And now that we are now all on the forefront of being out in the public, with all the trade shows and what have you going on, and as the laws are changing, again, it's important for us to understand that we still are walking this fine line between legal and illegal. So I hope you guys enjoy this show. This coming up next episode, 83, will be a episode where I will be getting into talking about how to break down the cost of goods and what you're manufacturing. How you can take a piece that you're making in one single item and figure out exactly, almost down to the penny, of what it costs you to manufacture. That way, when you go through the manufacturing process, if you're doing mass production or if you just do one-offs or what have you, or just more of a higher-end production line, you can really figure out what it costs for you to make that specific item by incorporating all your cost of goods, including your rent and overhead and everything else. It's just stuff that's really basic business talk, but is so important as we all, again, grow and move forward in this industry. So, enjoy this episode, again, with Luke Zimmerman Esq. It is fantastic. He is an awesome, humble soldier and warrior and gladiator for all of us out there, as himself and several of the lawyers out there that are now, there's an actual cannabis bar for lawyers, which is amazing that this is happening. But these guys are on the forefront for all of us, and myself personally will be getting myself involved with Luke as the laws begin to change, because there is no voice for the pipe industry and the laws as they change, and because the cannabis laws change, the pipe laws need to change as well. And if the cannabis laws change and the pipe laws don't change, then what's the point, in a sense, So I hope you guys enjoy again. I love you. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on the next episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show. Don't forget to subscribe to the show if you have not yet on iTunes. Share with your friends. Go to wiseguyradio.com. Subscribe to the email, and if you have any questions, please leave them at info@wiseguyradio.com. You guys take it easy. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.
What's going on, Luke? How you doing, brother?
I'm good. I'm having a nice day out here in Portland, Oregon.
Hell yeah. Yeah, man, it's got to be way better than here, dude. It was like probably 150 degrees in the studio today. It was ridiculous.
That is ridiculous. Now, It is a sunny day. I'm sitting here in the park and looking forward to talking to you about the state of paraphernalia laws in the United States and how this is impacting the glass culture.
Heck yeah. Yeah, man, so just kind of a brief background on how this came to be. Not to name specific artists per se, but I did see your name come up on a post, and it was a post that caught my eye and that I went ahead and did a little segment on my show about. And so we connected, and I've been wanting to bring a lawyer that is a friend of the community, in a sense, that knows our laws and stuff, to come on the show and really educate us, because there's so many areas that we have to cover our ass with. And it's also, by covering our ass, it's not always that we're completely covered. There's always like this fine line veil that we're always like looking over our shoulder, never really sure. So I'm super excited to have you on here. I hope that you, the listeners out there, you guys all dig this, because there's going to be a lot of amazing information. And if this works out, we might do like a bi-monthly segment on the show as well, just as things come up to date, because there's so many different areas to talk about, bro. I mean, like we've been talking already, it's like, it's crazy. Yeah. Like where do we even start,
It's a really exciting time to be practicing law, especially with the cannabis industry, and just looking at how laws are changing so quickly that I know I have to revisit a lot of information, because stuff can change in a week.
Yeah, it's like computers.
Even what we're seeing in California right now, I mean, there's a good chance in the next few months here that the whole cannabis culture and cannabis laws for medical use of cannabis in California are going to be rewritten.
Huh.
So that's going to be a complete game changer also for the industry. But I want to start out by saying everything that I'm going to tell you, this is not binding legal advice. This is my interpretation of how some of these laws are written. None of this should be acted on without talking to an attorney. I am not representing anyone who's listening to this interview. If you'd like to contact me for possible representation, I'm open to that. I'm licensed out of California. But do not take anything I'm saying as binding legal advice. That is the big disclaimer, okay?
Beautiful. Well said.
Okay. So would you like me to do a little bit of background on how I came to this, or do you just want to start jumping into some of the legal questions?
Yeah, man, because like I said, like ultimately in the long run, I'd like to make this something consistent, as our schedules work out and what have you. So if we can give them a little background on you now, that way down the road, we can tell them to go back and listen to the show.
I am originally from Wisconsin and grew up during a period where pipes were primarily made out of metal. I don't think I saw my first glass pipe until I was probably about 18. And then I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, lived there for a while. There was a few legitimate head shops, but it was still, this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, that it was a very infantile especially in the Midwest, you didn't see a lot of glass pipes. But then I moved out to Eugene, Oregon, and that was a night and day difference. Actually, one of the first people I met in Eugene was one of the members of the Eugene Glass Alliance. And by befriending him, I ended up going into the studio a number of times and got to see firsthand what was going on. And I mean, this was still an era where sculptural design really wasn't what was in vogue. It was still the traditional shapes, but seeing, reverse swirl Sherlocks and hammers, and that was really, really big tubes, a lot of marbles. That was that era. And I was in Eugene during Operation Pipe Dream. I remember that day very much, how that impacted some of the people I knew, and there was a lot of talk in the city just because there was raids. And so then for a period of time, I left Eugene and moved to San Diego and went to law school, and was kind of removed from the culture for a while. And then I happened to be at a music festival in the Northwest, and I met some more glass blowers and befriended them, and kind of got to catch up on the culture that I had missed out on for a while, and got to meet some really amazing artists. Then I moved to Amsterdam for a year to pursue a master's in law from the University of Amsterdam in international trade, and got to kind of do a comparison about what the glass culture looked like in Europe, especially for Amsterdam being a hub for cannabis, to what was going on in America. And I think Europe actually is starting to blow up right now, that it's a really exciting time. That I credit actually Hitman. Can we give shout outs?
Oh yeah, dude, absolutely. Yeah, I drop names all the time. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I think Dougie has had a huge impact on bringing glass culture to Europe.
Interesting.
Especially through all of the cannabis cups that I know when I was living there, when I moved there, you'd go into coffee shops and there was no option of having any extractions. And by the time I left, there were, but a lot of that came with the education that you couldn't really just efficiently roll this into a joint, because most Europeans it's a joint culture.
Yeah.
But I also want to give a shout out to Carl Termini and Hans Meyer. They made a go at doing glass pipes in Amsterdam years ago, and Hans is still there. I think Hans has moved on to either Spain or France now, but they were taking a crack at it in Amsterdam, and Adam Dunn also. That I think that they really laid a good foundation for growth in Europe. But now seeing that Europe is having their first flame offs, and I think that culture is really kind of growing up, which is really neat.
Interesting. I had no idea, bro. I've been so focused on myself lately, like a selfish bastard. I had no idea that was going on over there. Seriously, like that's amazing. Yeah, I had no idea, dude. I gotta get online and holy shit.
For having it be an American craft, it's really starting to have an international presence now. That if we're talking to head shops I guess it'd still be a head shop in Amsterdam, and asking them about where point of sales were going, there's a large collecting base also in Japan. For having Japan still have pretty strict cannabis laws.
Yeah.
They said, there's a lot of glass collectors, and then seeing that there's a lot of marble makers, and I know that there's a whole crew of Japanese glass blowers. I think that this is really kind of expanding internationally. I know there's more glass blowers in Costa Rica now.
Yeah, for sure. And that'd be an awesome place to blow glass.
Yeah, as a cultural movement, I think this is really starting to explode. But so then after being in Amsterdam, I totally got long-winded on that.
It's all good, bro.
After being in Amsterdam, came back to the States, started working in a traditional law firm. That had some issues that fell apart. Kind of asked myself, what do I think is going on with trends in America? And especially after being in Amsterdam and seeing that, you can live in a society where cannabis is tolerated and it's not destroying the community, and seeing how the culture was changing in America, and it was becoming more accepting, especially on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly on the West Coast. And I thought, well, I want to do intellectual property in the cannabis culture, And I couldn't really find more than about 6 attorneys in America that advertised that they were doing this. They weren't really even focused on it. They just had some brush up against it. And so I launched my firm, reached out to some people that I knew, especially in the glass culture, have been able to help out a handful of people with issues of cease and desist or trademark violation or copyright violation, which I think is only going to happen more and more for the glass culture. Because the glass culture used to be something that was more in the background of everything. It's always been a strong culture as a subculture, but it's becoming more and more a forefront.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with that, traditional businesses are starting to take attention to what this industry is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Like, and especially with the branding that's going on now, and with the bigger name artists that are becoming a brand. You know, it's like Versace and Gucci. We've now got Elbow and Joe Peters. You know, it's like, it's pretty freaking cool. You know,
the thing to remember is the reason that people use names, they use an alias. That's what it was.
Yeah,
it
exactly.
was a moniker as not to hopefully get arrested for what you were doing.
Yeah, I went by mine was Firefall for like the longest time, dude. That was like, I would never use my real name because of that.
Right. Well, and so for where I'm standing from a trademarking standpoint, when an alias is no longer really an alias, it can become a brand. And what you've been doing is building a brand, potentially unintentionally, for the majority of these artists' careers.
Yes.
That because most of the artists, it's not that hard to find them.
Yep.
You know, if you want to track down, especially some of the bigger artists, finding their phone number or finding a contact for distribution is not that hard. So if it's not an alias anymore, really looking at it as a brand. And so now what you got to do then is treat it as a brand and protect it as a brand. That you get some built-in common law protection, but you got to do some secondary steps to really protect yourself as a business and as a name that has been developed over the years. Because if you think about it, some of these pieces that, we'll say sell for $1,000, the value in some of those cases aren't necessarily just the craftsmanship that goes into the piece or the skill or the beauty, the excellence. It's actually the name also that people will buy off of brand name recognition. And with that, because, you can see some up-and-coming artists who are making amusing pieces, but they're still having a hard time selling. And then there's some artists who have a really developed name who can sell anything they make.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of that is off of brand recognition, which is only going to become more and more important in the glass culture.
Yeah, especially with social media, because like most people know your glass or your social media feed by your brand. And like when I was trying to think about, but like with my podcast, I created a Wise Guy Radio podcast page because I wanted to do exclusive things there and bring my followers there. But like, my audience is under my J. Michael Glass page. Like, my 9,000 plus followers I have. It may not be all, maybe only 1,000 of them, in all reality. But, the fact of the matter is I've found, I launched a page. I said, hey, come follow me, blah, blah, blah. And I got like 150 followers, which is awesome. I'd take one. But the fact is, my brand is, for my glass right now, is under the J. Michael Glass. But my item that I've created, my trademark for me personally, I feel my owls that I've coined the Wise Guy brand name, that's now my brand. Right. So I'm like an artist with a brand in a sense, and it's like it's a whole different weird thing because like I'm an artist. As an artist, I make chandeliers. I do other things as well where when I make them and sell them, it's really good money. But then my full-time glass me is the Wise Guy brand. So I'm trying to I've got multiple personalities that I'm playing with, almost like two different separate artist corporations or whatever, It's an interesting setup.
And that's, because some of the artists who are really famous right now, Joe Peters is a great example. We know Joe Peters is Joe Peters. Whereas, we'll use an example, I'm trying to think of a great, Salt. How many people know Salt's real name?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Do they know Luke? Do they know Lucan? I don't know.
Yeah.
And when you have that separation, there's different steps that you need to go about protecting yourself with that, especially protecting a brand. And I have seen some areas where there are more and more room for trademark infringement going on just between artists and names. let alone the underlying issue of trademark infringement from the glass culture pulling on popular culture, or we'll say non-glass culture, and seeing trademark infringement happen there.
Yeah, and that's my concern.
There's got to be an awareness of that.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think especially Instagram is a big one. A lot of the hashtags, a lot of the ways that developed businesses will police their brands or their companies is they just search hashtags that relate to their company. And if you're making a piece of glass that is intentionally or unintentionally capitalizing on one of these established businesses, I've seen some cease and desist letters that will be a problem for you, especially if you're making if you have a creative line of glass that you're making that is essentially recreating something that already exists for another company, you're inevitably going to have a problem.
Yeah, it's huge. Absolutely. So, like, for instance, I work at Disney, and I'm not employed by Disney, even though I receive their benefits, but I'm employed by the Rebus brothers. They were a third-party operating participant. And, I seriously doubt they're going to listen to this podcast, so I don't really give a shit talking about it. So I've done some Disney characters on the side.
You never know.
I know. But the reality is, I'm not worried about it. Because I want to share my story, and also, if there's ramifications, I'll share that too. Okay. But I've created Disney stuff, and up until I went seasonal there, my Instagram account was private. The only way you can see it was, and I have, it's hard to say Disney probably has Earl Nightingale or some bullshit name for a fucking, Instagram page that they go on and look around for pipes in their brands. But I would post something up that was, something functional of their brand, and then the next day, immediately I would pull it down. I just wanted to say, hey, look what I made, and then pull it off.
Right.
But I wouldn't do any hashtags that were Disney, nothing that represented anything near that, at whatsoever. Not even like the character name.
Oh yeah.
It's like, but then I see I want to bring, I don't want to say a name of an artist, but like the Kool-Aid Man that was going on for a while, that's an obvious trademark violation as a mass-produced piece that's now coming out of China, or was, I don't know if it still is or not, but that's like, it's an awesome idea, it's a great functional piece, but it's a fine line.
And that's if you can make one of those that's beautiful and you want to make it for yourself, that's not really as much of a problem.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to make them and start selling these as this is your bread and butter line of what I'm producing, you have a serious problem.
Okay.
You are, actively engaging in trademark infringement for a financial gain, because the underlying idea is you didn't create that concept.
Right,
you're replicating that concept in a new medium. Now, with that, you're pulling off of somebody else's hard work, and that blatantly is infringement.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, we're kind of mincing words here on trademark infringement and copyright infringement.
Right.
But yeah, you are taking someone else's intellectual property and capitalizing it for commercial gain, which you will, especially for an established business, you will find problems down the road with that.
So what about character work that's like, say, Ghost, for instance? He does a lot of character work, but his are all zombified and ripped apart and, and what have you. With that, because I know there's like that certain percentage, if it's changed just a certain percentage, they can't do anything necessarily. They may still be able to, but,
I would argue, especially if you're getting into fair use, parody, any of these things, right now, you got to remember the glass culture, especially if you're just talking about pipes, isn't going to necessarily get the same protection you would get if you were doing a painting. It's not perceived in the same way. Copyright law for artistic expressions protect artistic works, so sculpture, painting, music, movies. One of the exceptions to this is it does not protect functional design. Now, I have talked to a few attorneys who've been practicing far longer than I have about the concept of, can you protect a glass pipe with copyright? And there is a lot of mixed opinions on that right now. So if you don't even meet the level of something that would be protected from a copyright protection aspect, if you're doing an infringement, you're not even going to be able to bring up the argument of defense for fair use or parody. You don't even fall into that category anymore because you're not even in the copyright area.
So because of it's illegal paraphernalia per se.
Per se, but really because there's function. If there's function, you can't necessarily get a copyright. Copyright has to just be an artistic expression.
Okay.
And I would love to see this. I think there is probably room for a really good law review article about the impact of, sculptural design in the pipe culture. And is that protectable? Because there is a whole process for trying to separate design and function from artistic expression. But I don't know of anyone who's really gone to bat for that yet.
Interesting.
And try to register a pipe with, the federal government as in the form of a copyright. I don't know of that yet.
Huh. Okay.
So that anybody listening, if you have a piece that is incredibly beautiful, heavily weighted on the sculptural side in a very, very artistically done manner, and you want to take a crack at that would be something I would have to discuss with you.
Interesting. So even if you made a frickin' teapot, for instance, that looked like...
Teapot, you're probably not going to get... I mean, that's a sculpture, arguably, but you're probably not going to get that copyrighted because it's the function of a teapot.
Because it functions, right.
Now, you can get into it's not a cut and dry matter because if there's enough artistic expression on the teapot, you might be able to get the design or artistic expression protected. But you're not going to get the function of a teapot being a teapot protected.
Okay, because like Disney, for instance,
right?
Part of my business, I follow them as their marketing. They got every freaking thing right now frozen from the movie. Olaf freaking rain gauges, towels, sweaters. So the original design of that character is trademarked and copyrighted based on when they originally created him. Everything therefore after that's created and merchandise, is that more than on the trademark side of things because it's a trademark character of, the terms are, they're kind of, they seem like they want to bleed together sometimes, but then it's like you got to keep them completely separate because they're separate things.
That would be, in my opinion, more of copyright issues.
Okay.
Because, you can argue that, I don't know if you'd want to call it derivative work, but it's based off of an existing character that was authored.
Right. That was, and copyrighted.
Right.
Okay.
And so that would be, in my opinion, much more of a copyright issue. Just as, for glass, if you start pulling out popular characters and recreating them from movies, TV shows, you're recreating them in glass, you're looking at a copyright violation. So that's something to be very aware of because I've seen a lot of this go on. And I think in the past, it just kind of flew under the radar because major businesses didn't brush up against the glass culture. But now, especially through things like Instagram, it's a lot more accessible with the hashtags. That, that is one I encourage people to stick well away from. Don't recreate popular characters.
Yeah, because the same topic. Now we're going to put the copyright stuff away. Right. If a 5-year-old kid's on Instagram and they put in hashtag Kool-Aid Man and a rig pops up, that's for 18 and up purposes, then we're in a whole different freaking ball field with it. That's like, it's like you're in a whole different thing.
And that's there's two ways of looking at it. One, so we're done with copyrights, and that we're not just saying you're using, a pre-existing thing for commercial gain.
Right.
But for the idea of if it is akin to a trademark, if that character represents a trademark for that company, you're devaluing that brand. And if that brand is targeting children, so, you will use an example of Disney, because Disney is targeting children. And if you are now injecting a good that is capitalizing on one of their trademark aspects, that there's a possibility the parent would think, oh, wow, Disney now is engaged in creating pipes. You are seriously devaluing that brand and causing brand confusion. With that, you don't want to find yourself in that situation either.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. It's huge.
especially with children.
Yeah.
And it's just removing this just from the glass industry. I mean, anything in the cannabis industry right now, if you have a marketing plan where you want to do anything that's colorful, creative, be the Willy Wonka of cannabis, whatever it is, I encourage you not to do that. You are going to be, even if it doesn't happen right away, you're walking towards a lawsuit. Anything that could be perceived as targeting children, you should avoid, let alone if it's already existing and you're capitalizing on someone else's intellectual property. But just anything that is cutesy like that, you're creating a problem for yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, because look at the tobacco industry. I mean, they were nailed. All their, you don't see any characters, billboards, anything anymore. 100% across the board. And that could for us, it could be terrible. It'd be ramifications for that.
It's taking a big step back that we don't need right now.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on how old you are and you're listening to this, maybe you remember Joe Camel.
Oh yeah.
And what Joe Camel was, the way that went down was you are intentionally targeting children. We do not need anything like that. I mean, maybe the hands bear too. Hands of sky with clear blue waters. Yeah, I don't know if the bear is represented either. That anything that's cartoony or kitschy, that is going to happen in the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
I mean, there's already issues with that for advertising, and we'll get to that in a little bit because there's some interesting stuff on the state laws for cannabis accessories, I think we'll call them in some states.
Yeah.
But especially tied in with advertising, and what is acceptable to be advertising, who you're advertising towards, what age range is acceptable. That is very much going to affect the pipe industry also, or the glass industry.
Mm-hmm. So the biggest piece of advice I guess we can give our audience is if you have an Instagram account that has anything at all ever mentioning or has to do with anything in the cannabis industry, have it on your thing saying 18 and up or even 21 and up, and make your account private.
To be safe, I would argue 21 and up, I would keep it private, because trying to police that, I mean, if you're being followed by someone who's 16 and they somehow get their hands on a piece, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but you do open yourself up potentially for a lawsuit, especially depending on what the design looks like. I mean, if you're making really colorful dragon, we'll say, it looks like a cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
You are potentially just really creating a case against yourself.
Yeah, it's like my owls. They're cutesy and stuff.
Yeah, they're cute. I mean, those owls are really cute. So it's like, now, are you intentionally targeting that to your children? No. But if you've got a concerned parent who found that in their kid's hands, and especially depending on the state you're in, that's even more problems. But if you're creating identifiable characters like that, you really got to be concerned about where that is in relationship to children.
Yeah, interesting, because I know, like, I've taken pieces that I had an issue with, like my owls, for instance, and I saved it by ripping open the bottom and then making it big enough to fit a little tea light candle, and then I sell them at craft shows. These little owls that are like night lights, but looks exactly like my water. It's the same. It's my water pipe, which just serves a different function. So I guess in terms of if I want to brand out as, like, say, trademark and copyright my brand, my Wise Guy brand, I've got to be extremely careful with who and which direction. I have to go, I can't go both directions, it seems like. I can only either go towards the craft family shit or go completely into the adult industry, per se.
Yeah, well, I mean, as long as there's a few different ways to approach that. It's not as easy. I mean, you're in Florida. There's already some restrictions on how you'd approach that just at a state level.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if you wanted to pursue a trademark for creating smoking goods for tobacco use, so long as in good faith you're making these goods that is your intended purpose of how they're supposed to be used, arguably you could pursue a trademark.
Okay. Yep.
And I think, that actually dovetails pretty well into talking to you about, you'd asked me a question, is it illegal to ship pipes through the mail across state lines?
Yep.
And I did a little bit of research on this to use the exact words. So we're looking at U.S. Code 21, Title 21 of the Controlled Substance Act, which states it is unlawful for any person to sell, offer, sell drug paraphernalia, to use the mail or any other facility of interstate commerce to transport drug paraphernalia, and to import, export drug paraphernalia. Now, right now, at a federal level, drug paraphernalia is defined as broadly under Section B, but pretty much anything that is used to introduce marijuana, cocaine, hashish, hash oil, PCP, methamphetamine, and amphetamines into the human body through things such as pipes, hash heads, glass, stone, plastic, ceramic pipes without screens. Now, if you are making products with that intended purpose, you are still engaged in the act of creating drug paraphernalia, if that is your intended purpose when you create that. If you are shipping that across state lines, that is still illegal under federal law. There is a grayer area when you start to define what drug paraphernalia actually is, where, I don't know if people are familiar with the obscenity laws, but the whole I know it when I see it kind of relates a little bit to paraphernalia also. There is a list of 8 factors that are used to determine if it constitutes drug paraphernalia. Not all of the criteria have to be met, but it's kind of on a case-by-case basis of, is it what we think it is? And that's why the first one is, what are the instructions for the good, oral or written, provided at the time the item is purchased? Number 2, descriptive materials accompanying the item which explain or depict its use. 3, advertising. 4, manner in which the item is displayed for sale. 5, whether the owner or anyone in control is a legitimate supplier of like-related items to the community or is a licensed distributor or dealer of tobacco products. 6, direct and circumstantial evidence of ratio of sale of items to total sale of the business. 7, existence of scope of legitimate use of the item in community. And 8, expert testimony concerning the use of the item. Now, depending on what you're making, I would be including in all your sales that this is a tobacco good. My intended use, if it's not just purely for sculptural and for beauty and appreciation of art, is there is a disclaimer that this is intended for tobacco use. I think that is one of the biggest things any producer of glassware should include, and especially in all sales, especially in all packages that would traverse state lines.
Yeah, I agree. Okay.
The thing that really is a standout, though, for the 8 factors that I just listed, there is exceptions to this, and exemptions, which are interesting because this really impacts where the state of the industry is today. Is the first one is any person who's authorized by a local, state, or federal law to manufacture, possess, or distribute such items. Number 2, any item in the normal lawful course of business is imported, exported, transported, or sold through the mail by any other means and traditionally intended for use with tobacco products, including a pipe, paper, or accessories. Now, that is how a lot of the industry has been able to survive to where it's at today. Of those 2 points that I made, the first one is probably the more interesting one because this is the one that's changing. Any person authorized by local, state, or federal law to manufacture, possess. Now, there's a separation here because there are 4 states that have amended their laws to allow goods that are made for cannabis consumption not to be identified as paraphernalia anymore. So there's a gray area here of would the federal government honor that? Because it's still federally illegal as the initial definition of drug paraphernalia that I put out, anything used to consume, cannabis, cocaine, hash oil. But now you have states that are saying that you can do this. I think this is one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of glass blowers flock to Colorado. Which makes sense. I mean, that when you have a state that all of a sudden says that this is a legitimate industry now, and you feasibly could even, in some of those states, probably market your product directly next to a pile of cannabis. Now, if you're shipping those pieces across state lines, I think you have a serious problem, especially if you have any advertising that directly relates to cannabis, because you can't, in good faith, then argue, this is intended for tobacco use.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But this is a changing issue, and it's kind of an exciting time because there are certain states that I think you could probably live in as a glassblower, probably a little bit. Your chances of having confrontation or run-in or prosecution from law are probably less in Oregon, Colorado, Washington, and Alaska right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they've amended their laws. And what is unique is each one of these states has amended their laws in different ways to address the issue of what is considered paraphernalia and now what is considered a lawful good. Colorado, for example, and Amendment 64, Section G, marijuana accessories, now anything that's used for storing, vaporizing, containing marijuana or ingesting, inhaling, or otherwise inducing marijuana in the body can be considered a marijuana accessory. It's not considered paraphernalia anymore. So long as you're producing that and keeping that in state, you're arguably, you're following state laws. You still might be in violation of federal laws, but you arguably wouldn't have an issue with local authorities.
Right, yeah. That's always my concern is once you cross state lines, it becomes a federal deal.
Right. So, yeah, and it's interesting. If you look at Oregon and Washington, both of them, those states have amended their criminal code. More so, they just went in and crossed out sections which would constitute cannabis as being drug paraphernalia. But they kept it mainly in the area of the criminal code, whereas Alaska and Colorado both took the approach of redefining what marijuana accessory is as opposed to paraphernalia.
Interesting.
So that's just some differences. And the other thing that needs to be identified also then is because these states are 21 and over for cannabis consumption, you're only supposed to be selling marijuana accessories to people who are over the age of 21. So if it's intended use for tobacco, you should be able to sell it to an 18-year-old who can legally consume tobacco. But if it's an intended purpose of consuming, a cannabis or a cannabis product, that is only supposed to be for people over the age of 21.
So if you live in the states that are legal, then you have to get an ID to make sure they're 21, because
I would take that. I think that is being proactive for following the law.
Yeah.
I have not. There's so much confusion about implementing a lot of these cannabis laws that I haven't heard anything about paraphernalia implementation yet for the law. But I think that's on the horizon after this settles down a little bit. Just because I think it's a secondary issue just behind the actual possession of the plant or, a product derived from the plant. But I think it's on the horizon. I think this is going to get tested. I think it's something to be aware of. I think somebody is going to get in trouble for selling an oil rig to a 19-year-old. I think that'll happen.
So crazy. Yeah, it's just something to think about. Just everybody's. That's why I wanted to bring you on, brother. Times are changing, and they're changing for the better. Come the next presidential camp, the whole next presidential thing. Who knows what the hell's going to happen? Hopefully, it just gets better. But it's interesting to see where this all is.
Right. Well, and this is a thing to consider too. So, like in Oregon, following at least with the bill, Oregon and Alaska are still working on their implementation yet. But Oregon, if you're purchasing I want to get this right. So I think this would be called marijuana paraphernalia, which is legal under Oregon law. You also have to have an explanation of how the product's supposed to be used. Now, that would fulfill the federal standard for how they define paraphernalia under sections 1 and 2. But what that also then does is, if you have a description of how to use an oil rig, you have a written description, an oral description of how to superheat a titanium nail. If that hurts someone, you are opening yourself up for room of a product liability case, which traditionally has not been anything anyone's talked about in the past. But if a piece explodes or someone gets cut or someone gets burned, you could face civil consequences due to this, because this is a legitimate business now.
Yeah,
this is
absolutely.
not something that's in the background. This is something that is in the forefront. That I think a lot of people need to consider that, especially when coming up with new designs or doing product testing. If this is something that feasibly someone could get hurt by using, it's not. You really do open yourself up to a lot of liability from that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, it reminds me of like when McDonald's was sued for the hot coffee thing, you know? Old lady hot coffee in her crotch deal, and she sues McDonald's for like $10 million, where the hell it was. So if you guys burn yourself with your nail, don't sue any companies. It's your own fault.
Well, and that's the argument is it's not necessarily your own fault.
No, I know, absolutely. No, I agree. I'm just saying.
If it's reasonably foreseeable that someone could have hurt themselves by using your product, and granted that's a very watered down way of understanding product liability theory, but if it's reasonably foreseeable that someone could hurt themselves in that manner, you potentially owe them, or could end up owing them, damages.
Yeah. Well, like, we just had a guy here in my town that had a vape cigarette, or whatever, explode on him. The guy was a war veteran. He's like, I survived all these, tours of duty, and I almost get taken out by my vaporizer pen, for his tobacco stuff. And
right.
Literally, the thing got too hot or something on his charger, and it exploded. It's like, but because it's made in China, he couldn't do shit about it.
You can, actually. Products liability, the theory states, both the producer and point of sale are accountable and liable for damages.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Feasibly, the vape store, or, if he ordered it directly from China, that's a lot harder to try and argue, but if you bought it from a local retailer, you arguably have, potentially, a claim against that store. Because if they're selling faulty goods, the liability extends to them also.
Interesting.
And I think there is going to be so much of this on the horizon. Looking at the glass industry and looking at cannabis culture, that for some of the conferences I've been to, for what we talk about as lawyers, looking at the future of what people will be dealing with, I think there's going to be a lot more business formation issues. There's going to be a lot more intellectual property issues. But the next wave is going to be a lot of lawsuits. And a lot of, especially anything that's making medical claims, you're going to find lawsuits. Anything that somebody in this gets directly hurt from using the product, where before maybe it was, walk it off, or I don't know who I complain to, or how do I hold someone accountable. Now you can have businesses held accountable. You can have individuals held accountable in a civil court. It's not just a criminal action anymore.
Yeah. Huh. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say.
I think it's a big one to digest, just because that has not been traditionally how a lot of this culture is operated. People haven't thought about that. It's like, okay, if a piece broke and someone got cut, it was like, oh crap, that sucks. Maybe a piece got replaced, maybe it got fixed, but no one was talking about potentially covering medical bills or medical expenses.
Yeah,
I've never heard of that. That is much more a reality now. That is on the horizon of happening.
Well, it makes sense, man, because like the way the community's going and the culture's going, it seems like these type of conversations between myself as a glass artist and yourself as a lawyer who represents and is a friend of our community, like these conversations need to continue to go on in groups, in forums and mastermind groups and stuff to really see, because like it's gone, like you're saying, it's gone from underground, and then Operation Pipe Dreams happened, and it went even further underground, and then it all of a sudden just came blown out of the ground. Where like we're talking about how like our aliases has become our brand names, to now with legalization in states, to now candies and chocolates and brownies and everything else that's being produced out there, not even to mention the stuff that is being consumed by smoking it. And now we're dealing with liability issues. And I mean, it's like when the cell phone came out, they didn't think about people probably texting and driving and killing people on the street.
Oh, yeah.
Now we got to deal with the same shit now with pipes, because it's such a forefront. That's why, like today's show, I was all about, y'all need to pay your damn taxes because this community is getting, viewed by the IRS because of how big it is, how the monetary value is going through the frickin' roof, and they see that this is a multi-gazillion dollar industry that is now wide the fuck open in the eyes of everybody. They know we're doing this. Does cover our ass now, not be stupid.
Yeah, and I think, from talking to a lot of artists who've gone into glass blowing want to just be artists. Mm-hmm. And I respect that. But I think at this level, you need a good support team. I don't expect everyone to know how to do their taxes or how to file business taxes, just as I don't expect you to know how to file a trademark on your own. Mm-hmm. But there needs to be an understanding that you do need this assistance. I mean, and inevitably, especially at some point, being able to find insurance to back up your business.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Because you're like any other product now, especially depending on the state you're in. There's obviously some states you're not like every other product yet, but that is, I think, the way this will go. And that's the trend that I'm seeing. And with that, you'll be treated no different than any other business.
Yep, absolutely.
And especially, I think the biggest way this initially will get tested is through the vape pens and through the electronic vape pens. And it's similar yet different to just the glass industry, but these are the areas that I think that the first big round of lawsuits will come from, just because of the issues of heavy metals, the issues, like you mentioned, of the guy who having these things blow up. I mean, those stories are not uncommon. Yeah. But that's only, now let's move that over and seeing someone get hurt from a hand torch, seeing someone get, a nail or a rig that gets heated too hot and kind of blows up or cracks. Those are going to happen also. So I think, and I think this industry, to use a comparison, I like to consider the glass industry as entering its teenage years, I think, where the cannabis industry, I use the comparison, the cannabis industry right now, because they have lobbyists, there's some really great trade organizations advocating for the direction of the industry, that the cannabis industry is kind of driving the car, and the glass industry is riding in the car with the cannabis industry kind of in back, like an infantile kid that really doesn't have a lot of input about where the car is going, when the car stops, what they get for food. They just are kind of along for the ride right now, and they're benefiting from it because they get to go on the trip, but they don't have a lot of input on where it's going. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be a huge shift to get the glass culture into the driver's seat. I don't know if that would necessarily happen because it is so dependent on how the legalization of cannabis and the cannabis industry is developing. But I think there's a lot of room for the glass industry to sit in shotgun and have a lot more input on how this is going and have more of a adult conversation about what its needs are and how to have it represented adequately in the developing law.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's no longer are we there yet. It's how can we help you get there and help us get there reasonably and professionally, because we're going to be the next freaking not Walmart as a brand wise, but I mean as a big entity in terms of they're going to be everywhere. Eventually every state's going to be like this.
Arguably, there's going to be only an increased demand for these products. Mm-hmm. And I'll say, for having been at a number of the suit and tie kind of cannabis industry events, bringing up the glass culture, I don't see any of the faces that I know from the glass culture showing up at these events. Yeah. And there needs to be a voice. There needs to be representation there. And talking to a lot of the people who are really helping push or develop the cannabis culture in the cannabis industry, cannabis law, cannabis lobbying, bringing up glass, they just kind of, it's not laughable, but they're just like, it's not even on my radar. Like, that's not what, I don't care about that. Like, that's a secondary aspect to it. seeing that there's so many people whose livelihood they've invested into this, there needs to be more representation.
Give me a heads up, bro. I'll be there. Let me know.
All right. Well, the big one, I will say, if people want to get involved, the NCIA is something that would be really, really good for people to get involved in, especially people who like to be an advocate, people who like to have more of a dialogue. Oh, I'm having dog disobedience issues behind me in the dog park. All right. But yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more of this from the glass culture. And I think with that, if the glass culture steps up to that challenge, the likelihood of making this more palatable, where you have gallery events and there is more perception of it being an art form, there's a lot more room for that.
Yeah, I agree.
That because it will be perceived as more of a mature industry.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's happening. I mean, it's to a certain extent it's happening either way, but it would be on its own terms. And that, I think, is immensely important for any industry.
Yeah,
when they define their parameters.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's. I think it's. There's like a generation of us that are still. I'm not gonna say stuck, but I don't know. For lack of a better term, we're kind of stuck in the old ways of like being underground. You know, I still have the idea in my head that I need to crank out 50 pipes a day to make a living to support my family. Where I don't anymore. You know, that's the days of past.
Right.
You know, but in the same time of like the anxiety of being in the public view, you know, it's weird, man. It's almost like this post-traumatic stress disorder shit, you know, we're all dealing with, you know, where like the new generation is like, no, fuck you. I'm going to get out my face out there. I'm going to support the community.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and be like you know, the millennial generation in a sense, I guess that's part of it. You know, like this new generation of glassblowers that are out there, like they're having a blast. But they also don't necessarily look at the laws and stuff like they should, maybe. But maybe if they did, they'd get completely involved, you know?
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing to remember. And I think this is very true in the cannabis culture, too, is for people who are getting involved in this, talk to people who've been involved in this culture for a decade plus, for 20 years, and ask them what it was like. And pay attention to that, because I've seen this just from the entrepreneurial side of the cannabis culture right now, where people are forgetting how many people were arrested or how many people had their lives ruined. And these are the people who helped us get to where we are today. And if you are not taking into account your history, I think you're really missing the point about what this is and why this is such a special time and why this change of law or this end of a prohibition area is so huge. Mm-hmm. Because this has really had such a detrimental impact on so many people's lives.
Yeah, and especially, you know, like, I mean, you know, the numbers that when I started were maybe in the hundreds, maybe, you know, maybe 1,000, probably not, maybe in the hundreds. And then in 99 when I started, and now there's you know, 10,000 plus probably in this country alone. I mean, I don't know, but it's, you know, like the Florida scene itself, it's blown me away in the past 5 years how big the scene here has gotten, you know, in Florida. And now we've got Big coming, you know, with the trade shows now are coming. We had the Florida Vape Show last year. Now we've got Big all of a sudden is in town next month in Miami. And, you know, it's like, so I guess to go forward on that, like, what's the perspective on the trade shows that are coming to states as strict as Florida, who at one point in time almost banned pipes altogether? Now we got a trade show coming in town. That's a vape adult novelty trade show, you know, but there's still, it's a pipe show, you know, more or less.
And that's, I think these things, it's capitalizing on the changing perception of cannabis in the States right now, but I don't think that means you have no room to get prosecuted. I mean, there's still, even in states where there's legal recreational cannabis use, people are still getting prosecuted. That I think making that bold move about going to states where there's not even medical, I would be apprehensive about being involved in that. There's not much of a, outside of this is all intended for tobacco use, which hopefully all of it is if it's being sold in those states. Otherwise, it would be drug paraphernalia. Outside of that argument, you don't have really a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
And with that, I mean, taking that away, that's illegal. You are breaking the law.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about this because in the idea of a trade show, especially in a non-medical state, if you have one person smoking cannabis in it somewhere in proximity
Exactly.
of one of these goods,
Yep.
now there's a presumption, I would argue, that everything in that venue is actually drug paraphernalia.
Yep. Because
if I was a prosecuting attorney.
Absolutely, bro. That was the one thing I thought of.
It's precarious to host those because unless you really can account for tobacco, there is not much. I mean, that's a very thin argument, in my opinion, for rationalizing why these sales are occurring. And I think, if anything, it's probably capitalizing for the most part on the changing paradigm in the States, but I would not get ahead of themselves in assuming that everything's okay.
Yeah, changing is the key word. You know, it's crazy because like when we in Pinellas County alone, like the congressman that tried passing the laws statewide to ban pipes, he's locally here from Pinellas County. He's actually a Pinellas County representative, and that the whole shit in Florida all started here in my county with one of our local shops. Whose guy's got a franchise of like 5 shops now, and you know this guy, representative guy, former crackhead, you know, turns his life around and now is like completely against everything and has one bad deal and then goes crazy in Pinellas County. We have an ordinance passed, which became now we have the Florida Smoke Shop Association, and which is
right.
You know, a lot of them got together. But people now in Pinellas County, most shops you walk into, you have to sign a waiver that says everything on there that the shop is completely released of liability, and that if you do get arrested and we go to jail, you're paying our lawyer fees as well on top of it. But it's this whole reasonable intention thing, which they found was unconstitutional because I ran a smoke shop for 3 years, and it was like, all right, so if some guy with dreadlocks walks in my store and just wants to buy incense, should I just assume right away when he walks in my store that he's in here to buy a pipe for illegal intentions? Like, it was completely, you know, bullshit. But that's the whole moniker here in Florida. You know, it's this reasonably known bullshit.
Profile your customers about what I can sell you.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And it's asking way too much, and is blatantly unconstitutional because you're just made to make a judgment call the way someone looks.
Yeah, exactly. Completely.
No, but I respect that. I remember when that was going on with Florida and how there were some people who just were choosing not to ship any product to Florida anymore. And I respect that they got together as an organization. And this is kind of what I was saying for, you know, the comparison with the car ride is getting together and having that voice, that collective voice about this is what our industry is. Mm-hmm. And this is how we're going to sustain and, you know, be able to carry on doing what we're doing. So as much as I think that it's a huge liability, I do respect that organization was made. Mm-hmm. I think that was really, I mean, there needs to be more of that. Just because raising that awareness of what this industry is, there's so much of a need for that. I mean, any chance I get, especially in a professional setting, recommending people watch Degenerate Art, mm-hmm. where I think, you know, Slinger did a great job in really capturing something in film, the documentary aspect of what is this industry, where is this going, and doing so very beautifully, removing it from references of cannabis or anything of that nature, and just really focusing on the artistic expression of it, because independently, I think that you can just view this industry purely as that. The trade shows in states that are not at a point where they've integrated some form of medical or recreational, I would have some contact with a criminal defense attorney if you needed it before you went and presented at their shows. Mm-hmm. That is the very loose. I mean, does that mean that the sky is falling? Not necessarily, but it also means you're not really putting yourself in a great commercial setting, in my opinion.
Yeah, you've got to be preemptive in these type of situations, especially here in this state. It's interesting. So, you know, with the Florida Vape Show, they came and went, nothing happened. I didn't go to it because of the same exact reason, because I wanted to let these guys go through the process of going through a show, see what happens. I'm just not going to be involved in it. I'm going to watch it from from afar.
Yeah. And I think it's in some places the paradigm has already shifted where it's, some of these trade shows have been going on for a few years. That I know there's one in Wisconsin that, but I think as a lawyer, that just would, if a client came to me and said, this is my opportunity to present or market my product, I would have a number of requests that were pretty strict for them to present at one of those events. So
cool. Yeah, man, I hear you. That's good to know. So I guess,
but you got to remember too, lawyers by nature, we generally tell you the worst is going to happen. I mean, that is how we handle the situation. We have to think about the worst case scenario.
Yeah, but I do the same thing, bro. Like that's how I've survived for so long. I feel is because I've been overly paranoid in certain situations that because I didn't get into a certain situation that went down where people got in trouble. And it's
right.
I don't know if it's a street smarts thing or what or how I was raised, but it's always been. My dad always said expect the unexpected, so I've always just kind of looked at it from that perspective as cover my ass at all means.
Well, yeah, I think, and the easiest way to do that is just don't break the law.
Yeah.
If you're not breaking the law, then even if you do end up in a court situation, feasibly, this shouldn't go bad. If you are breaking the law and you're choosing to market yourself in an audience public forum, you're just asking to get arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, and I have seen this a number of times in the cannabis industry is people want to still break the law and understanding that there's a federal disconnect with all this. So presumptively, if you already are having contact with the federal government, even if you're following state law, you still very well might have a problem. We probably will have a problem. But follow your state laws. Just follow your state laws. I won't even say to the best of your ability because that's like, oh, well, maybe there's some way you can
right.
not follow it. No, just follow your state laws, point blank. Follow your state laws. And just be aware of your surroundings, Look into your local ordinances. Look into, for the idea of some of these shops having gas and gas tanks running in a residential area. In some cases, that's enough that if you had a point of contact with the police, you're operating explosive gases in a residential area. Some places, you're not zoned for that. So,
yeah. Well, like I know my house. Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
No. This is just me going on a rant of potential ways that you're finding yourself in that contact with the police that is going to end poorly in ways that people just overlook. And are like, oh, well, I think this is going to work, or I'm cavalier, like there's going to be no problem.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you can find yourself in a really problematic situation.
Yeah, man. Like I've worked out of my house probably 75% of my career. I've either been in my house or in a studio in the back. And lately, when I got married here, and my wife and I got a house here, and where we're at in Dunedin here. It's an artsy fartsy town, super cute little place. There's breweries everywhere. We can walk to the city, the whole 9 yards. Awesome place. But I've got a school within a stone's throw of my house, and there's signs right down the street of this apartment complex that is known for some bad shit going down sometimes. That says that drug activity from here to that school is illegal. And when I'm out here, when I was in my garage, making my orders, and the police helicopters flying around the neighborhood looking for somebody, I would shut my shop down. I would get so damn paranoid just because knowing where I'm at, for one. Two, I've got this cop flying over my house. For all they know, I'm glowing like bright orange at night out of my garage, like I'm a grow house or some shit,
That would, I think, raise some potential suspicions. But once again, so long as you're not breaking the law, you arguably don't have anything to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
But do you still have the room to get harassed? Yes.
Yeah.
And do you have the room to find yourself in a situation where you're now trying to explain what you're doing, even though you're following the law? Yes. And that can be both time-consuming, could potentially end up going against you. And, so I think, especially in residential zones, that's something to really take into consideration. I wouldn't recommend that, just especially in the possibility of if anything is faulty. The room for something catastrophic going on, there's a lot of room for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a good little side note there, man. I appreciate you sharing that.
well, and the other one I think, especially to think of as a fallout from that, if that scenario did play out, and that's one of the ways that the media hears about, we'll say major media really hears about the glass culture, is due to an explosion. And all of a sudden they're able to draw a parallel between that and, say, a BHO extraction explosion.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to start painting the industry in a negative light in a way that you will be actively working on changing public perception of what that is in a way that you don't want to go down that path.
Yeah, I agree. Well, we've had that happen a couple times here in my state, in Florida here. On the news,
right.
Kids blow up their freaking kitchen because they're in there doing their thing.
Oh, man.
Shit.
When I was living in San Diego, when I left San Diego, a week before I moved, one of the neighboring apartment complexes, I heard a boom, went outside, saw some smoke, went over, passed the police officers, and they said, well, it was, a drug lab. And so I said, okay, well, was this methamphetamine-based? Because I know that there's a lot of toxic chemicals that go on with it. And they said, oh, no, it wasn't that one. So it was this BHO extraction. And the cop kind of looked at me, and I'm like, oh, I heard that there was one over by SeaWorld a few years ago. But it was. And to see the amount of damage that was done to that apartment, it was, that's not a joke. This is a very serious issue, let alone, we're thinking about glass shops where if your tanks, if somebody doesn't know what they're doing or is using shoddy equipment, there's a lot of room for that to go bad.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, the safety first mentality and, try to find a shop that is in a commercial zone or something where, just be as safe as possible. So.
Yeah, it's good thinking. So I guess all in said, then, there needs to be some sort of organization, union, something that needs to start to become formed of some sort as an overall representation. Now, do you think it should be representing the glass artists specifically, or should it be a community, cannabis community, or just, how could the focus be?
In the interest of how that would go right now, essentially there's two groups that come to mind. One, I think there's room that if someone out there wanted to make a managerial agency for managing glass artists, that would be great. Mm-hmm. I think there's room for that. I think especially artists who do not want to be overly involved in the business side of things, there is a room for an agency for that. I think somebody should step up and do it. I actually have one or two people in mind. I hope they do it if they're listening to this. But I think it needs to happen. And then two, I think there does need to be a guild or a trade union aspect of this, because even addressing the issues that we were just talking about with safety, mm-hmm. if you could have a standard of excellence kind of written up by a trade union of this is what we expect or this is what we recommend for, operating safely in the parameters, because there's plenty of people who are picking up glass blowing right now who are not getting proper mentorship. Mm-hmm. The way that it was used to be done was purely from a trade mentor-apprentice relationship. Mm-hmm. And if you're just going to pick this up and say, oh, I can figure this out by watching some YouTube videos, there's a lot of room to hurt people.
Yeah.
And create more liability. That I think if you proactively, as an industry, created a trade union that laid out parameters of what was expected of people involved in this trade, that would be a really good indicator of a maturing of the overall industry.
Yeah.
And then from there, that can dovetail into lobbying. Anytime that a state is discussing amending their laws for cannabis use, one of the things they always discuss is, paraphernalia, that having somebody who can advocate and reach out to whoever is lobbying in the state to say, listen, we want consideration too. Here's what we want for our industry. Here's what we need to have adequate representation for our industry. Opposed to just having, laws changed and then basically figure out what happened to your industry because we weren't taken into consideration. So I think a union would allow to have that voice.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, I know a lot of people who are involved in this, they just want to be artists or maybe they just want to be businessmen, but it's growing to be something bigger than just that. And there needs to be some sort of leadership with that. I'm not saying there's one person who needs to undertake that mantle, but there needs to be a dialogue, at least a forum where people can come together and, say this is what we expect as a baseline from the industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, yeah, I think there's a lot of room for that. I hope somebody, if that went on, I would be interested in helping partake in that. But
yeah, man, it was just kind of on the same note. So, and I'm saying this now because if anybody's listening to this, one of my past guests, him and I, after the show, we discussed going to like the Champs and the Age and the big trade shows and holding not a convention, but like keynote speaker type things with a panel to ask questions.
Yeah.
Because there has to be some, like you're saying, like that's why what got me started with this podcast was seeing Degenerate Art and then seeing Instagram and the reaction from that film. The movie itself, dude, it re-sparked this whole new thing in me that I never really knew was there. And as a child, I've always wanted to get into law and what have you, and I've always been very political, but I've also been very artistic and I got in the glass, but I've also been very compassionate in the community that we're in. I love, 100%. So my goal with this show is to help teach and spread the word, make safety a normal thing, and help find some kind of cohesive, across-the-board standard that we all live by, rules we can all follow and hold up to. Now, you're going to have some people who are like, yeah, fuck you, I'm not following rules, I'm doing my own thing, which is fine, I'm all about that. But in the overall scheme of things, as the laws change, this has to happen. For us to grow as an industry and be looked at, like you're saying, as a mature adult business that in 10 years from now, the money that's going to be coming out of this industry is going to be like nobody's ever seen before if it continues to grow. And the only way that's going to happen is if people grow the fuck up, we start getting together, have these mastermind groups and talks, and get this shit going. But do it at the conventions where all the artists are already there.
No.
Everybody's already, the smoke shops in there and everything.
I think you hit it. I think the conventions are a great place to not just have a flame off, but start to have an educational component to it.
Yeah.
That I think organizational, educational, call it what you want. There is a demand for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think an immense demand. And I think it would just benefit the culture as a whole, the industry as a whole, I think. And it just kind of brings it out of the shadows. It makes it more legitimate. Let alone if there could be like a national guild. I understand that this is asking a lot, and if anything, this would take a bit to set up. But and we're starting. I'll say this: I just joined the National Cannabis Bar Association.
Awesome.
That it's the first ever bar association for attorneys who are focused on practicing cannabis law and law for the cannabis industry. That we're emerging like that, and we're, I would say, a pretty developed industry as lawyers go, but we're having a new branch of this formed. That I think there is a lot of room for the glass culture to have something like this formed too.
Yeah, it needs to happen. Absolutely.
And I know there's growers associations that are coming together to form growers unions.
Yeah.
That bud tenders unions. That I think the glass culture needs some semblance of this.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, I agree, man. Well, as we continue to further talk on this discussion, I'm a go-getter and a doer, and I'm all about putting myself out there. Like I used to do the hemp fest here in town. Like I was all about, not protesting, but just in a way where people would see what the hell was going on, and I had an opinion out there. But with the show, and if we can continue, even if it's every 2 months or whatever on your time, let's continue this discussion, bro, because, I know the community out there wants to hear this, and I'm sure there's a bucket load of questions that everybody has on how they can either be involved or just to cover their own ass, and as topics come up, if anybody wants to send myself or Luke any questions at all, our links are all going to be on the show notes page, so you guys can definitely contact us that way, and he'll give us all of his information at the end of the show. But, we all need to, be glass artists, have fun, be an artist, be, whatever you got to do, be creative, but at the same time, and we got to take this shit serious, because if we take it as serious now, in 10 years from now, we're all going to be loving the shit out of the fact that we took it seriously. And we got the ball rolling to a point to where we're going to change the culture, we're going to change the country, the perspective, the whole 9 yards. Like my father-in-law, he's like, he's not anti-cannabis, but his perspective on it is, he doesn't like it. But he likes the fact that I'm an artist and I'm creating some nice stuff, and he appreciates what I'm doing as an artist in the glass field. and as a business person too. So it's interesting. This perspective's changing. You know, he's in his 70s, so it's
I think that's the big thing is there is a paradigm shift going on right now, and I think that paradigm shift will be benefited by having a more reasonable, open dialogue that comes from a place of organization and a collaborated, involved effort, opposed to just random voices going forward of like, here's a snippet over here, here's a snippet over there. That doesn't, for people who are not aware of what this culture is or are not necessarily saying they're on the fence, if you can give someone a reasonable explanation of what this is, where this is going, and why this has value, I think that's much more persuasive for moving the paradigm along, the shift along, opposed to just, you know, I'm rocking out doing this awesome thing and I'm over here making my ducats. It's like, that's not really assisting this shift in a very responsible way. I mean, that's really kind of self-preservation. And I think we're at a time, well, we don't need that. That's not really beneficial. And if anything, that puts people who are really putting their life's work into this shift a lot of room to take 2 steps back. Yeah. And I mean, I will turn down clients if they don't have the right ethos or ethics, or I get the impression that, you know, they don't want to follow law. I legally can't represent you, but even more so than that, you're detrimentally impacting a point of transition in the United States history where we still don't know where this is going to go. And if you're doing anything to hinder that progress, you're hurting so much of a movement that has worked so hard to get where we are right now. But we don't need that. You know, this is not just all about making money right now. It's a very far cry from that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I think the whole respect, responsibility, organization, just, you know, that's what we need.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because our community is passionate. You know, whether it's the people that work in it as artists or the shops or the collectors or even those that don't even touch the stuff. They just enjoy looking at the glass or just the pictures online or whatever. There's a huge, you know, passion for what we do out there, and it's awesome. You know, it's mind-blowing times, and it's humbling, and I love it. You know, I mean, you know, like this podcast, bro. You know, I'm not getting paid for this show. Every show, it's an hour long, sometimes an hour and a half. It takes me anywhere from 6 to 10 hours to produce a show. Not to mention that I have kids, and I'm married, and I run a full-time business. But I do this because I love the fact that I have an outlet to talk to everybody and have you as a guest. Like, it's an honor, bro. Like, you know, and I applaud you for doing what you're doing, man. Like, you're putting yourself out there as a lawyer, you know.
I appreciate you saying, you know, you commend me for picking this. I have been fortunate enough to meet a number of people, especially just from the glass industry side of this, let alone the cannabis industry, who are just wonderful people, you know, and that entrepreneurship that I get to see, it just blows me away. I get to hear so many unique ideas and, you know, new products, or, hey, maybe we could do this. Hey, maybe this will help people. I love it. It's really fulfilling for me, and it allows me to challenge myself with aspects of how I practice law. But I've just met so many wonderful people, and there's a lot of the people involved in the glass culture are just really, really good people that I just want to see this develop in the right way. You can find my law office at the law office of Luke Zimmerman APC on Facebook. I am at lawofficelszz.com, and my email is lukeszimmerman@gmail.com. And lastly, my law firm phone number is 415-230-5308. If you're in the state of Oregon or the state of Washington, I'm going to be speaking at an engagement in September, a cannabis financial boot camp. I'll be lecturing on intellectual property. There'll be another attorney lecturing on tax issues. There'll be another attorney lecturing on business licenses for the state of Oregon for cannabis businesses. And we're going to have 2 CPAs who've been working in the cannabis industry for the last 5 years about 280E tax issues. So I will have a link up to the event that if you're interested in participating or learning more about finances in the cannabis industry,
I would appreciate it if you'd come by. Thank you again for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Wise Guy Radio Show. If you have any questions, comments, or remarks, please leave them in the show notes page area where it says comments. We'll see you soon. Have a wise night.